co-hosts who were once very good friends have indeed fallen out. Now, they both returned to the ITV show, but reports have been circling that their telly partnership could be in doubt. So, how do you handle a PR crisis when it plays out on your screens every single day? Josh Wheeler is a broadcast PR specialist, so of course you've got all the answers for us, Josh, haven't you? Good morning.
I can try. Good morning, Samir. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so they seem to just be ignoring it and getting on with their jobs. Would you say that's the right way to handle it, Josh?
You know, it's a really funny one. I think for the longest time in our world, a crisis, the best way to approach it has been to pretend nothing's happening until you really, really have to. And the kind of the rule of thumb is the less you say, the better. But I think, you know, what's happening right now, where this has spilled over to, is that they have actually lost control of the narrative. The narrative is now being made by everybody else, everyone on social media, and everyone's talking about it. So my personal opinion, and this applies to Holly and Phil this morning, ITV, but it applies to every organisation, whether it's a business or whatever. Actually, in many cases, it's often best to front it. We know nothing's perfect. We know people fall out. All of those things happen. But what you don't want to do, what you don't want to be in the position of, is that everyone is deciding what's happening for you. That's the tricky area.
So take the Phil and Holly situation, if they were to front it, as you say in inverted commas, how would that look?
Yeah. Interesting. So this is really a tricky area, because this is ultimately about a relationship. What I can say is what we would typically do in a situation like this, almost what might be happening behind the scenes, if that's useful. So the first thing that needs to happen is somebody needs to define who is responding, right? How is this happening? What's going to take place? One person in charge. Find out, you know, is this thing salvageable? In the best way possible, that person needs to be as unbiased as possible. Maybe it's an external mediator. Define whether it is actually salvageable or not. Then you need to dip into devising the strategy. If this partnership can actually survive, how do you convey that? How do you show that? As you say, if it's playing out on screen, the audience is already used to seeing them. You know, they talk about our issues, the things that affect us. They're not the royal family. We expect to be able to dip into their issues too. You know, I personally think very frank, open and honest discussion when you've reached the end of this on air, a bit like when Philip came out, you know, it is a good way forward. If it is over, you need to decide the next steps now. What you don't want is this constant chiming in of lots of different people, ex-hosts. They then need to start thinking about, if it is over, the succession planning. Who is in there on an interim basis? Who are the replacements? What kind of audience testing is going on behind the scenes to understand, right, who is going to fit? A perfect example is, you think back to Eurovision just at the weekend, everybody had an amazing time. When the hosts were first announced, I think a lot of people, certainly on Twitter, were a bit confused by Alicia and Hannah Waddingham. Now everyone's like, that we need a double act show, maybe them. The reality is you know, somebody has spent a lot of time thinking about that ahead of time, and that's what should be happening.
So, but do you think that there is, sorry to interrupt you, Josh, I just wonder whether this is just going to blow over, whether it's necessary to actually get that mediator or that separate person and, you know, really kind of go through the ins and outs of, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? They're still doing their jobs. They're still on our tellies. Is this just something that's just going to blow over? And can you just leave it and see what happens over time? What do you think?
The tricky aspect is, I think what you kind of described there is what we would ordinarily describe as an issue. An issue is something that is just bubbling away. It's something that you need to be working on. Every company faces them. Every PR person is working against them. This has spilt over now into really full-blown crisis.
Has it? So how would you quantify that? If you're saying like it's crisis in the PR world, what quantifies a crisis? Was it the fact that the narrative is now being taken over by other people? But that can happen with any story on social media. Everyone's going to have an opinion. So how in your experience, do you quantify crisis?
The way that we would define this is that it has taken over. So that's the sole focus now. You look at the hashtag of this morning. People go to this morning because they want uplifting, sunshine, rainbows in a difficult world. You know, what you don't want to see is a strained relationship, really. So, for instance, we just did some quick analysis. There's something like 27,000 mentions of This Morning across broadcast this week alone, and we're only at Wednesday.
Isn't that good for This Morning, though? Just to turn this on its head, if we take that quote, "There's no such thing as bad press," what would you say as an expert in press?
See, I don't believe that. There is such thing as bad press. The tricky thing is what you want it to be is balanced. You don't want people to be sycophantic. You don't want people to be negative. You want people to enjoy it. You want the audience to be with you and buying into that relationship. Now we're at a situation where you have ghosts, ex-hosts, kind of talking about, strained relationship, tweets that are coming out that are critical of kind of previous things that have happened. And who knows, the reality is we're not in those situations, so you can't say for certain what's happened. But the difficulty is the people that are customer, in a sense, of This Morning is the person that's lost in this. For a lot of people, this is a bit of a giggle. People are talking about it, etc. But actually, there will be people at home that are kind of heartbroken by this. That they've bought into that relationship for a long time, and so that will be hard for ITV and This Morning to get right. And they have to spend a lot of time thinking about how they convey, what they convey, and maybe that is happening behind the scenes. I think there has to be a lot of work to address those people. In any crisis, you've got to think about how you address the affected. But when you have other stations, columnists, front page headlines about your show, and it's about the person as opposed to the thing, I think it has spilled over. It's not happy times. They need to find a way through this, and if it is salvageable, great. If it isn't, then they need to start thinking about the audience, because in a few weeks' time, if this rumbles on, at the moment, what really matters in that world is that advertisers will probably feel quite happy at the moment. They'll be thinking, great, higher viewers, because people are tuning in to see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
That will wane. If the front show, if that continues, that will wane. And suddenly you're in a situation where the core audience is starting to think, oh, it's not real. Like, that's not what authentic. I'm actually buying.
Yeah, and it's that authentic relationship that they buy into. Yeah. Well, Josh, it's been a whole conversation. Thank you so much, and no doubt we will see how it all pans out, and we'll bring in your expertise, because no doubt, things may happen in future, and we'll see which direction they take, whether they do confront it, as you say, or whether they just carry on. Let's see. Thank you so much. Well, Philip released a statement regarding his friendship with Holly, calling her his rock, if you like, and that was Josh Wheeler, who is a broadcast PR specialist, giving his perspective on what he thinks should happen next. Should happen next. Should happen next. Should happen next. Should happen next.